Hello students, welcome to my YouTube channel. In this video lecture, we are going to continue with the payload sums from Keith Williams. So far we have done 30 questions. In this video lecture, we will do the next 5 questions and continue with this series. So let's start with today's question number 1, question 31. So question 31 states, you have to calculate the maximum traffic load for following aircraft conditions. You have been given basic empty mass, maximum structural takeoff mass, two crew, that means two pilots, each weighing 90 kg, special equipment 750 kg, zero fuel mass and maximum structural landing mass. Now, so let's start with a step number 1. Our step number 1, like always, is to make three columns, one for takeoff mass, the second for landing mass, and the third for zero fuel mass, right? In the takeoff mass column, you are going to write a value which is lesser of performance limited takeoff mass and maximum structural takeoff mass. So less of performance limited takeoff mass, maximum structural takeoff mass. In case of landing mass column, you are going to choose a value which is less of performance limited landing mass and maximum structural limited landing mass. To that, you are going to add trip fuel. So plus trip fuel. In the zero fuel mass column, you are going to use the formula which is zero fuel mass plus fuel on board or takeoff fuel. So let's start putting the values in the respective columns. In the takeoff mass column, we have to write a value which is the lower than the other value. Okay. So the decision we have to make between maximum structural takeoff mass and performance limited takeoff mass. Over here, we have been given only maximum structural takeoff mass. So we will write that only. So maximum structural takeoff mass is given to you 7000 kg. Next, in case of landing mass column, you are going to write the value for landing mass, which is 6000 kg. Trip fuel is not given to you, so leave that. Next, zero fuel mass is 5370. Okay, your zero fuel mass. Fuel on board is missing, that is not given to you, so leave it like that. So out of these three columns, we have only one column which is complete. That is the first column, takeoff mass column. Okay, so we are going to consider this takeoff mass to be our regulated takeoff mass. So regulated takeoff mass will be equal to 7000 kg. Okay, the other two columns, the column for landing mass and zero fuel mass, are useless since we do not have trip fuel in case of landing mass column and zero takeoff fuel or fuel on board in case of zero fuel mass column. So we cannot continue with the equation and find takeoff mass with respect to those quantities. Let's use the formula for our regulated takeoff mass. Regulated takeoff mass is equal to fuel on board or takeoff fuel plus your payload, or let's say traffic load, plus dry operating mass. Now in this question we have not been given fuel on board, or also known as takeoff fuel. So that means we will not be able to use this formula to find out payload or traffic load. So there must be some other formula with which we can find out traffic load. So that formula is, look at this question. We have been given zero fuel mass and we have been given basic empty mass and the masses of variable loads, right? So in the previous lectures, I had drawn a flow chart, a flow diagram, in which I explained to you how we start from the very basic, that is basic empty mass, and from that we uh, we follow this route and we come down to takeoff mass. So from basic empty mass, when you add variable loads to basic empty mass, you get dry operating mass. Dry operating mass plus takeoff fuel is your operating mass. Dry operating mass plus payload is your zero fuel mass. So to calculate your payload or traffic load, you have to subtract DOM from zero fuel mass, right? So zero fuel mass minus DOM is your payload. The second way to find out payload is to subtract operating mass from takeoff mass. Operating mass plus payload gives you takeoff mass. So to get payload, you have to subtract operating mass from your takeoff mass. Now, what is operating mass? Operating mass is nothing but DOM plus takeoff fuel, right? But in the question we are dealing with, we do not have takeoff fuel or fuel on board. So it is difficult or it is nearly impossible to find out operating mass. So we will have to prefer using this formula to find out traffic load or payload. So let's use this formula to find out the answer to our question, which is traffic load or payload will be equal to zero fuel mass minus dry operating mass. In this particular question, dry operating mass value is not been given directly to you, but they have given us the masses of variable load and basic empty mass. Now, basic empty mass plus variable load is nothing but your dry operating mass or DOM, correct? So instead of DOM, I am writing these two values, basic empty mass plus variable loads. Substitute the values, zero fuel mass is 5370, subtract basic empty mass 2300, variable load is the weights of two pilots and special equipment. Now the weights of two pilots is one pilot weighs 90 kg. So both of them will weigh 180 kg plus special equipment 750 kg. So 5370 minus 2300, 2300 plus 180 plus 750. So 0, 8 and 5, 13, 4, 5, 12, so 3. So 5370 minus 3230, which is 7 minus 3, 4, 3 minus 2 is 1, 5 minus 3 is 2. So the answer is 2140 kg. Okay. So the correct option will be option Bravo. 2140 kg is your answer. So this is how you do the sum. We started with a step number 1. Put all the values in the columns, found out a regulated takeoff mass. Then we proceeded to step number 2, our usual normal formula, which is regulated takeoff mass equals fuel on board plus payload plus dry operating mass. Had they given takeoff fuel or fuel on board in the question, we would have used this question and found out traffic load. But since that was not given in the question, we resorted to some other formula, which is zero fuel mass minus dry operating mass, substituted the values and got a traffic load information. Let's go to question 32. Maximum allowable traffic load is what? Performance limited landing mass minus dry operating mass and landing fuel. Performance limited takeoff mass minus operating mass. Structural limited takeoff mass minus operating mass. So the correct answer is option delta. Okay, the lowest value out of all these three possible options. The lowest, it can be the lowest of anything, but you have to remember that all three are correct, and out of those three correct payload values, you have to select that payload value which is the lowest of them all. So performance limited landing mass minus storm and landing fuel, performance limited takeoff mass minus operating mass, structural limited takeoff mass minus operating mass. Question 33. What is the maximum traffic load if you have performance limited takeoff mass, maximum structural takeoff mass, takeoff fuel or fuel on board, performance limited landing mass, trip fuel, and dry operating mass? So in this question, they have not given any information about zero fuel mass. So we will have to make only two columns in this question in the solution of this question. So let's start with that. Step 1, takeoff mass and landing mass. In takeoff mass column, you are going to write the value which is the lowest of which is the lowest of performance limited takeoff mass and maximum structural takeoff mass. In the landing mass column, you are going to write the value which is the lowest of or lower of performance limited landing mass and maximum structural landing mass. To that, you are going to add trip fuel. Trip fuel. Okay. So now the value which is lower than the other in case of performance limited takeoff mass and maximum structural takeoff mass is value 7275, which belongs to performance limited takeoff mass. So let's write down here 7275, and in the landing mass column we have only been given performance limited landing mass, so we have to go with that. No point in making a decision between performance limited landing mass and maximum structural landing mass since we do not have structural landing mass given. So 5350 strip fuel, which is 1370. So 5350 plus 1370 is 6720. Okay, 6720. So we have two possible takeoff values, 7275 and 6720. You have to select that value which is the lower, okay, which is lower in number. So that value is 6720. So 6720 becomes a regulated takeoff mass. Let's go to step number 2. Step number 2 is the formula regulated takeoff mass equals to dry operating mass plus fuel on board plus payload or traffic load. Substitute the values. 6720 equals to DOM 2300. Fuel on board, also known as takeoff fuel, is 2000 plus payload. Payload or traffic load will be equal to 6720 minus 4300, which is 1420. So the correct option will be option delta, 2420 kg. Let's go to question 35. Let's go to question 34. What is the traffic load in the following conditions? DOM is given, takeoff mass is given, takeoff fuel is given, landing mass is given, and basic empty mass is given. So now here we will have to use a direct formula which states that takeoff mass will be equal to dry operating mass plus traffic load plus takeoff fuel or fuel on board. Substituting the values, you get takeoff mass 3650, dry operating mass 1900, traffic load is what you have to find out, takeoff fuel is 450. So traffic load will be equal to 3650 minus 1900 plus 450 is 2350. So 3650 minus 2350 is 1300 kg. So delta will be the answer. Okay. Next question. Question number 35. So here we did not make three columns because uh, we have not been given trip fuel in the first place, and also no information about zero fuel mass and takeoff fuel or fuel on board. So directly we stick to this formula, which is a step number 2 usually. Substitute the values and get the answer. Questions of this type will be asked in DGC exam, airline entrance exam. So be ready for this. Be quick, substitute the values, get the formula. get the answer correction. Question 35. What is the maximum allowable traffic load for aircraft given the following data? Maximum structural takeoff mass is given, performance takeoff mass is given, DOM, total fuel, startup and taxi fuel is given. Again here we need not make three columns. Only the first column will be sufficient, which states that you have to choose a takeoff mass value which should be the lower of performance limited takeoff mass and maximum structural limited takeoff mass. Now we have performance limited takeoff mass to be equal to 65,000 kg, maximum structural takeoff mass equal to 62,800 kg. Okay, so between them 62.8 is the lower value. So 62.8 will become R, 62.8 will become R regulated takeoff mass. Now let's use the formula. Regulated takeoff mass equals to dry operating mass plus traffic load plus fuel on board or takeoff fuel. Substituting the values we get 62.8 equals to DOM, which is 34.5. Traffic load we have to find out. Fuel on board or takeoff fuel is, that is not given directly, but fuel on board, also known as takeoff fuel, will be equal to, now fuel on board or takeoff fuel is that fuel which is in the fuel tanks, which is available in the fuel tanks when your aircraft is lined up with the runway and ready for takeoff, right? So that fuel will be equal to total fuel minus startup and taxi fuel, right? So total fuel is 20,000 minus 0.35. So that will be equal to 0.35. So 10 minus 5 is 506. So that is 19.65 kilograms. So your fuel on board or takeoff fuel at the start of takeoff run is 19,650 kg or 19.65 kilograms. Therefore, traffic load will be equal to 62.8 minus 34.5 plus 19.65. So 62.8 minus, so 34.5 plus 19.65, 54.15. 62.8 minus 54.15 will be equal to 8.65, 8,650 kg. So the correct option will be option Charlie. Okay, 8,650 kg is your payload or traffic load. So this is how you do this sum question number 35. I hope you have understood all the 5 questions I have done in this video lecture. I request you all to keep practicing these questions from Keith Williams as well as RK Bali. If you have any doubts, questions, let me know in the comment box. I'll resolve them for you all. Hit the like button if you have liked this lecture. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, and share this video with all your friends. Remember, practice makes you perfect. So keep practicing. All the best.